Beijing is running its largest fiscal deficit in decades and the economy is barely responding. Wray, STA Wealth Management. The Bank of England decided to keep their rates unchanged in their latest meeting on Thursday. Worth, do you believe not cutting rates was a good decision?
I think that's generally right, that they will ease in August. And I think that the Bank of England has a tricky situation on their hands. So the UK is likely heading for a mild to moderate recession as you have a spike in uncertainty and particularly policy uncertainty. Brexit is going to be a messy long-term process. We have tight financial conditions. We've seen some capital flight with more to come, and both reduced investment and construction, which is only modestly offset by better exports. So the growth outlook is weakening, and there's definitely downside risks there. But the inflation outlook is also rising. I think it's reasonable to think that you could see inflation rise to the 3, maybe the 4% range over the next year and a half. And that'll be particularly true if the pound stays weak. Now, Andy Haldane, who's the chief economist at the Bank of England, came out yesterday, and he was very strongly in favor of easing in August. But he's saying that they're in a position where he'd rather take the risk of a policy overkill than fall behind the curve. And with that in mind, I do think that you're going to see the BOE cut. I think they're likely going to cut their short-term rates to 0. And I think that that's going to put more downward pressure on the pound and frankly some upward pressure on the dollar as well.
The United Kingdom also appointed Theresa May as their new Prime Minister. Do you believe this apparent political stability will continue to have this calming impact on trading and strengthen the pound in the long term?
No, I don't, to be perfectly honest. I think that the narrative with Theresa May getting into office as Prime Minister is that she was a Remainer, that she wouldn't pull the UK out. But shortly after coming into office, she's, I think, tried to support maybe her legitimacy as PM by saying that Brexit is Brexit. She has to honor the will of the people. I'd remind you, it's a non-binding referendum, and there's a lot of details on how this can go down. But she says publicly that she intends to pursue a Brexit strategy and make it a success. I think that this is a very toxic political situation, and I think it's going to create a lot of long-term uncertainty that's likely to drag on matters. So, frankly, I think the bigger risks around Brexit, so many people focus on the UK, but the bigger risks are, how does it affect the European Union? How does it affect the U.S. dollar? I certainly don't subscribe to the doomsday kind of outlook for the UK, and it's probably better off having someone who wants to remain overseeing that process to where it's not an extreme separation. But I do think it's going to be messy, and I don't think that's going to help strengthen the pound much over time.
The Chinese economy expanded 1.8% in the second quarter of this year. Do you think these figures are indicative of the health of the Chinese economy? And will we continue to see these positive figures?
The first thing I'd say here is I don't think that GDP is indicative of the Chinese economy much at all. I think it's a heavily manipulated number that basically tells us what Beijing wants us to believe. And that's true with the other numbers like industrial production, fixed asset investment, and retail sales. There's a lot of fudging in the numbers, but frankly, there is too in the West. When you look at the results that are coming through from China, second quarter GDP, on a year-over-year basis came in at 6.7%, a little better than expected. In recent months, you've seen a bit of a pickup there. I would have expected that from a huge amount of stimulus pushed into the system on the credit side earlier this year and on the fiscal side. I mean, Beijing is running its largest fiscal deficit in decades. And the economy really is barely responding. We've seen a big increase in government-led investment, but private sector investment, particularly in Northeast China, has just kept falling. And even though you have a fairly nice number, up 10.6% on retail sales, which is a lot more than the 9.9 expected, I don't think that there's a lot of real economic data or underlying activity to really support such a sharp increase in retail sales. I don't think it's that strong in reality. So what I see here is an economy that has failed to rebalance, that's built up a massive non-performing debt load, and that's squeezing its financial system into a very unproductive place. The half-life of credit is dropping dramatically, and the economy is really not that responsive to fiscal stimulus. So I think you'll see the Chinese economy continue to slow and grind lower. This improvement and the stimulus you've seen is part of why global conditions have been a little bit better than they were at the beginning of the year. But I think that'll come back. And the only real way for China to deal with its mess at this point is to recap its banks, to float the currency, which will be very disruptive globally. And I think that can free them up for another era of credit-led growth where growth could pick up for a while. Until you see that, I think we're going to keep grinding lower over time.
Thanks for lending us your time today, Worth. That wraps up today's analysis of key events that happened during the week. For all the latest updates, be sure to stay tuned with Dukascopy TV.